Last week we talked about the power of one invite, and we have been going through the power of one for several weeks. The power of one day, one prayer, the power of one person. Last week was the power of one invitation, how it could change a life, it could change a family's destiny, it could change the way that family works for generations. Today we talk about the power of one decision. The power of one decision. And the decision that we're discussing this morning, I want to be very clear, is the decision in our lives to follow Christ. Because I want you to get this part clearly. There is no decision that you will ever make that is as important as this one. Do you believe that Jesus the Christ is the Son of the living God, and will you live for Him? That's the most important decision you will ever make. It's more important than who you marry. It's more important than what your career will be and where you will live and how you will raise your children. It's more important than what you'll do on the weekend. It's more important than every decision that you will ever make. Because of all those other decisions, they all have a time where the consequences stop. This one doesn't. Your decision decides things forever. Your decision about Jesus will determine your destiny and your eternity forever. And so it is the most important decision you will ever make. The decision to follow Jesus. Some of our decisions, we need to be reminded as to their importance. Today we're going to be working out of John chapter 5. John chapter 5, starting in verse 2. And we're going to talk about the pool of Bethesda and a person who was an invalid, who could not walk, who was sitting there. From John chapter 5, verse 2. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. In this story, Jesus goes to this pool, and this pool is a very popular pool because people believe that there are healing properties to it. It has a lot of legend around it that they believe that when the water stirs, that an angel is stirring the water, and that if you get in there, that you'll be healed. Now Jesus sees this man sitting beside the pool and finds out that he has been unable to walk. He has been an invalid for 38 years. Now a man who has been in this state for 38 years sitting next to this pool, you wonder, why isn't he better yet? Why isn't he better yet? And so Jesus asks him a question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? I think this story has a lot of corollaries for us. Because in our culture, in our time, there's a lot of people that want to pitch a camp close to Jesus. Somewhat close, but you know what? We don't want to quite get in. We don't want to quite go there and give our lives to Him and have all that change. We want to be somewhat adjacent to Jesus, but we don't want to give Him our lives and have Him be that part, that role in our lives. And so we want to be close, but we aren't quite willing to change for Him. And Jesus comes along to this man who has been an invalid for so long, and He says, "Do you want to get better?" And it's a legitimate question. He has made his living by begging for 38 years. He has been pitied and needed help for 38 years. And when you live in that condition your whole life, Jesus wants to know, do you actually want to get better? Do you want to change? Do you want me to heal you and make you whole? Now this man has an earnest response. Yes, I do. He gives some excuses though. Along the way he says here, he says, but whenever I try and get down into the water, somebody goes in first, or I don't have anybody to help me, and he comes up with all these excuses. The man probably had some legitimate reasons why he hadn't been healed. But none of these are of any consequence to Jesus. In fact, he ignores the reasons. He ignores the excuses. He completely just ignores them. And we do the same thing too. We know we should follow Jesus. I come in contact with people all the time who say, I know I should be in church. I'm just not. I know that Jesus should play that role in my life, but he doesn't. And we say, I know I should be this, and I know I should do that, and I, just been so busy, or the family is just so hectic, and we go through all these reasons why we haven't done it. Why we haven't done it. And we're just like this man in the story. And Jesus comes along, and he sees us singing alongside the pool of faith, and says, why don't you get in? You don't want to be healed? We live in an excuse culture, and I think we come up with excuses much like this man did. Everything that goes wrong, well, we aren't accountable. It's not my fault. It's that other person, or it's the machinery, or it's this, or it's that. And we come up with a dozen reasons why it wasn't me. When we do poorly at a task, we have a reason why we didn't do well. We have to give a reason that it didn't go smoothly other than we messed up. We have excuses for everything in our lives, and I'm just as guilty as anyone. I'm just as guilty. I have excuses too. I don't like to be the reason why it failed or why it didn't come to completion, and so I love having an excuse just as much as you do. A place to pass the buck and blame. Came across some great definitions of excuse. The first one is pretty simple: to make an apology for, or to remove blame from. This one I like much better. Definition of an excuse. Excuses are tools of incompetence, used to build monuments of nothingness, and those who specialize in them seldom accomplish anything. You know that person. That person has an excuse why it's never their fault, why they didn't mess up, and why it's somebody else's problem. And you see that person and you know what? They're never going to get ahead. They're going to be in the same mess today, tomorrow, for years, because they just don't ever get out of it. And you look at that, and I tell you, Jesus isn't concerned with your excuses. He doesn't care why it hasn't happened. He just wants to see you made whole again. Just like this man, he didn't care what the excuses were for why he hadn't been healed. He just says, do you want to get better? Do you want to get better? Because if you do, I'm here. The truth be told, we love our excuses. We hold and cling tightly to our excuses, whether they're to a family member or a coworker or even to God himself. Think with me of some of your lamest excuses. Maybe you tried to convince your wife that it was okay you forgot your child at a friend's because of that marathon of American Pickers on the History Channel. Or maybe you told your boss you missed work because of icy roads only to have them run into you at the grocery store that afternoon. I can tell you my lamest excuse, and it's my favorite one. I was busy with church stuff. Busy with church stuff, and it works. If I didn't get something done, I was busy with church stuff. If I missed something at home, I was busy with church stuff. If I didn't get something else at church done, well, I was busy with other church stuff. And this excuse I like to use a lot, but I tell you, it becomes entirely ridiculous when I use it with God. God, I'm sorry I haven't spent much time in prayer lately. I was busy with church stuff. How do you think God reacts to that? Now, I didn't get and see these people that I know were hurting and going through a hard time because I was busy with church stuff. I mean, your excuses can be good things, but that doesn't mean that they're worth an excuse. God doesn't really care for our excuses. We all have our excuses. We have excuses for how we spend our money. Well, I really need to improve my golf swing to impress my boss, so technically this new driver is a work expense. Or, God, I'm supposed to give you my 10%, but this has been a really tight month, and so you're just going to have to do without. How do you think God views our excuses? What do you think he thinks of our excuses? You look back at that story, and you see Jesus' response. He just ignores the excuses. He has no time for them whatsoever. He just moves on. He cares about the person and their condition and how to make them better. And so this man who is hurting and paralyzed and truly in need of help, truly he had good excuses. And Jesus asked the man, do you even want to be made well? Do you actually want to be well? Because if you do, I can do something about it. And this man, the excuses start. And how it's not his fault, nobody helps him, and then people cut him off and they hold him back. And Jesus, extremely dismissive of the excuses, says, get up and walk. Be changed now. Jesus offers healing. No waiting, no worries. I think this is quite often the way God looks at us. God hears excuse after excuse as to why we're still sinning and why we haven't given our life over to Him. He hears our excuses about, you know what, I'm just too busy to put you in this place in my life. Or, you know what, I really want to do these things before I start going to church, before I start giving. And we give excuse after excuse as to why we haven't started following Jesus. Why we haven't placed Him in this place in our lives. And Jesus says, I don't care about the excuses. I want to know, do you want to be better? Because I can heal you. I'm the only one that can take away your sins. I'm the only one that can make you better. And for 38 years you've been living like this. Do you want to be better? And He says the same to us. Do you want to be better? What if instead of reasons and excuses to wait, what if today we said, I'm going to follow Jesus? What if we just made the decision to be His and to be moved forward in life and faith instead of remaining stuck? People act like there isn't anything at stake when it comes to a decision about faith. Like it's not a big deal. This is truly the most important decision you will ever make. In fact, we're told that it's not just a decision that matters here. The angels celebrate in heaven when a person decides to follow Jesus down here. When a person comes to Christ, when they give their life to Him, when they enter the waters of baptism and are made new, the angels celebrate. They throw a party. And that's amazing and wonderful. And that's the way God looks at it. And some of you, you've put it off. You've said, I'm just not going to live for Him yet. I mean, you've put off church altogether and said, you know what, I got too much going on. Or I like my Sunday mornings to myself. Or I want to do this and I have too much to do. And you go through and you put off church. Maybe you put off Jesus. And you say, yeah, I can't give over to this person. To this man, to this guy. I can't give my life to him. I want to live for me. And you say that. And you live that out. And so you put it off. Maybe you put off baptism and the decision to follow Him. And you say, you know what? I know I need to make a decision for myself at some point. I know I need to choose Him at some point, but I don't want to yet. I was watching a movie in which the star actress told her male counterpart the things she dreamed of. And she said, someday. His response was pretty telling. Someday is just code for never. When all you do is put it off and believe that someday. You come up with excuses for why it hasn't happened and you put it off and say, maybe someday. Maybe someday. I can tell you, even my daughter has figured out that if I say someday, it's probably not going to happen. And we tell ourselves and we fool ourselves into thinking someday. Someday this is going to happen. Someday I'm going to be changed. Someday I'll belong to God. Philip, in the book of Acts, is explaining to the Ethiopian eunuch the way of God. And he's explaining to him that Jesus is the Son of God and going through the scriptures and the text. And the Ethiopian eunuch, once he realizes who Jesus is, he responds with, look, here is water. What is to stop me from being baptized? I tell you, once we've decided to follow Him, there should be nothing to hold us apart. And I think these are the same words that Jesus says to this man. Do you want to be made well? Stop with your excuses and stop putting it off. Live for me now. Be mine and I will take care of you and I will heal you and make you right. Today is a day for no more excuses. I wonder, do you remember when you decided to start following Jesus? When your faith became real to you? Do you remember a moment in time where you know what, I am going to follow Him and I'm going to take Him seriously and I want to be Jesus's and I want to go to heaven and I want to be His? You remember a time when you made that decision? For me, it was April 23rd, 1996. And I was a sixth grader and I remember I was pretty blessed. My aunt and uncle were going to take me to Disney World. We're going to fly to Florida. And they were going to take me to Disney World, but it hit me in preparing for that that I had never made a decision to follow Christ. I never made it. I'd never said it. I grew up in a church, but I'd never said, I'm a sinner and I need Jesus. I'd never made any sort of declaration. And so I was terrified that if I got on that plane and something happened, that I didn't know what would happen to me. And so in the middle of the week, it wasn't a Sunday morning, and it couldn't wait. We drove into church, and I gave my life to Christ, and I was baptized and came up new. And for me, that's what it looked like. Do you remember when you made that decision? This week as I was preparing, I happened to be working on some other stuff. I was working on trying to put all sorts of history stuff together here at the church. I was looking at baptism records and these dates and these stories of these times where people gave their life to Christ, and it was amazing to me. Over the past 3 years, we've had 25 baptisms, and if I think back a little bit further, I remember a lot of these wonderful moments of people giving their life to Christ, and it's an exciting moment, and it's one I celebrate because the angels celebrate in heaven. And so I'm excited when a person gives their life to Christ. And I look back, and I was looking through some of these records, and it amazed me to look at some of these people. I look back, and the oldest one we had was Jackie Wagner, and Jackie comes to first service. And Jackie Wagner, April 16th, 1944. And I go through, and I started looking, and you got Ardeen over here. And Ardeen Olhausen, February 7th, 1965. And I could go through, and there were her kids. And there, generations that you find of people giving their life to Christ. Of that moment and that decision. And it was pretty moving for me to look through those. And I went on into the past year, and it's awesome to see the decisions. The people giving their life to Christ, and to watch the ripples of the faith. It's amazing. The power of one decision. What that decision is to follow Jesus with all that you are. Now, for some of those people, it was their first moment of belief. It was the moment that they first decided that they were going to follow Jesus. For others, it was an act of obedience. They've been faithful for many years, and they decided, you know what, this is something I need to do. This is a part of my walk of faith, and this is a decision I need to make for myself. And I look at those, and I can't help but be moved. So today I tell you, today is a day to make a decision. Today is the day to get right with God. Because someday will never come. The time is now, and the truth is this, we are only promised today. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. None of us are guaranteed it. So put off your excuses and get right with God. For some this morning, there is a decision that needs to be made for the first time. Maybe you were even raised in a church, but you've never just made the decision. You made the decision to say, Jesus, you are my one and only. Jesus, you are my Savior. And you've never made that decision for yourself. You need to make it. It's a call. You look at the book of Acts, and every time somebody comes to faith in Christ, it was a decision of their own. It was them deciding to follow Jesus and give Him their all. And they confessed Him as Lord and Savior. And they entered into the waters of baptism. And it's a beautiful picture of being made right with God, of coming together and putting on His death, burial, and resurrection. And so for some of you here today, if you've never made that decision, I encourage you. You need to be thinking about it. And not just someday in the future. You need to be thinking about it. And you can catch me anytime. Because you need to. That's a decision for you. For others, you know Jesus. And today I remind you of the call of every Christian life to be the light of Jesus in a dark world. Remember the moment that you decided. Remember what happened to you in your life. Well, God has called you to share that with others too. One of the easiest things that you can do is invite someone else to church. One of the easiest ways that you can share the gospel is just to invite someone to come to church with you. I know it's sometimes uncomfortable, but I tell you, the studies show that 75% of people say that if they were asked, they would go. 75% of people say, if I was asked to go to church, I would go. I'd go with them. nobody asked. I can't tell you how many people come to our church because somebody asked. Because they were invited to something small, or an Easter egg was left on their doorstep. I'm amazed that these small invitations and these little things sometimes end up in people's lives being changed. And I love that. I love that part. I love that that's the way the church works. And for you, I want to tell you that you have the opportunity. In 2 weeks' time, we do something we call Friendship Sunday every year. And Friendship Sunday is a great outreach for us. And you have 2 invitations in your bulletin this week. I promised you last week there was 1 last week, 2 this week, and 3 next week. I want you to invite somebody. Invite them. They can invite them, if you have to, invite to pick them up and bring them with you. Invite them to sit with you in church. Invite them to come. Because they need to hear the message of hope. Because they need to hear about Jesus. And so I encourage you, invite somebody. That's the best thing that you can do. It's the easiest way that you can reach someone for Jesus. To make it possible, to make this plausible, I want to tell you, we are going to do whatever it takes. We will remove all of their excuses if we have to. And so, now a little of this is in jest, but follow along. For those who like to say Sunday is my only day to sleep in, we will place cots in the gym so that they can sleep in the night before. For those who say the pews are too hard, we will have a special section with lounge chairs. For eye drops will be given available for those with tired eyes from watching late night TV. We'll have steel helmets for those who say the roof would cave in if I ever came into the doors of the church. Blankets will be furnished for those who think the church is too cold, and fans for those who think it's too hot. Scorecards will be available for those who wish to list the hypocrites present. Relatives and friends will be in attendance for those who can't go to church and cook dinner too. We'll distribute stamp-out stewardship buttons for those who feel the church is always asking for money. 1 section will be devoted to trees and grass for those who seek God in nature, and doctors and nurses will be in attendance for those who plan to be sick on Sunday. The sanctuary will be decorated with both Christmas poinsettias and Easter lilies for those who have never seen the church without them. We will provide hearing aids for those who can't hear the preacher and cotton wool for those who think he's too loud. I tell you, we have the opportunity. We have the opportunity to see lives changed. As the praise team comes up, we have one more video that I encourage you to go out there and share with somebody what Jesus has done.